Okay, so let's kick off now. We are also live on Facebook, on our Facebook page. So if any one of you doesn't really want their name to be out there or their face, please don't switch on the camera when the Q&A questions come at the end. And with that, I want to say, Vuk, welcome to this event. The idea of this event, let me tell you, it was very simple. Some of us, some of the people who are also on the call, were following the U.S. election night together. Probably some of us had the champagne bottle next to us, waiting for a landslide victory of Joe Biden. And then the night started to get longer and longer, and the week started to get longer and longer. So I guess that this event is for not only for us, but for everyone out there who found himself or herself in the same situation. So I quickly asked around the members of our community for anyone who could explain what happened, and one of you brought me back to you, who I had the honor to attend one of your lessons in one of your master classes in one of the EAPC events. I remember that you famously predicted Trump's victory back in 2016, and that your life is dedicated to predicting anything you say on your LinkedIn page. So I think that we are good to go. You're going to have a presentation on what you think are the key points, and later we will follow up with a moderated discussion by me, and I invited a few members of the community who will be able to ask their questions in the end. So thanks again, and all over to you, Vuk.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I'm very happy to be here to talk about this very interesting topic. I'm going to start sharing the screen, right? Is that fine? Okay. First of all, a little bit about me. So thank you, Sebastian, for the introduction. So yeah, I run a company called Oracle Intelligence Systems. It's a UK-based company, and we are a data science company that builds prediction models. That's kind of the main point of it. I'll just talk briefly about it in the presentation, but the majority of it is going to be me explaining our model and what we did and how this actually works, and then basically to show you what we've done for the recent 2020 prediction. A little bit more about me. So I did my PhD at Oxford. I finished it in 2019. It was in political economy. Before that, I did a master's in LSE, also in political economy. And before that, I did a undergrad in Zagreb in economics. So my field is very, economics, political economy, that sort of thing. And I'm also active in the academia. I'm writing some papers, a book out of my PhD, but the company is kind of the main focus of interest right now. Okay, so without further ado, let me just share the screen. I hope you can all see this. Yeah, cool. Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna put us on full view. That's not possible. Okay, full screen. Yeah, it is. Good, perfect. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of the point. I told you, Oracle is the name of the company. We're basically a company that successfully predicted both Brexit, Trump, and as of 2 weeks ago, Biden as well, with a 1% accuracy. And what we do, we use something called the Bayesian Adjusted Social Network Survey. So the point here is a survey that's a little bit different than standard polling that you might have seen, but it's still based on an actual poll. So we do actually ask people to give us their prediction. But the point here is that in addition to the survey questions, we also use network analysis to make things even more accurate. And I'll show you how that works. Just in general, so our basic point is to try to pick observers. So we go and find people via social media. So we give them an ad on social media. They walk into the survey, they solve it, and then we kind of ask questions about their attitudes, some emotional cues, etc. And then we deliver insights to our clients based on this. So without further ado, let me just tell you about what the Bayesian survey is all about. So why is this new, and what's new with this whole approach? So there's two parts of it. The first part is the so-called wisdom of crowds thing, where we ask people 3 basic questions. So we ask you to express a preference, so who you're going to vote for, product you're going to buy, and your opinion on a certain issue. And then we ask you about how other people think about the same product or issue or candidate. And finally, what do other people think that others would answer, how they would answer the previous question. It does sound a little bit convoluted, but that's deliberate, because we want people, when people go for the survey, we don't want just people who are going to walk through, just click through in 5 seconds. We want people to actually stop and think, right? To give their opinions about a certain issue or candidate or the question that we're asking. So we're trying to encourage them to be a little bit Bayesian in the sense that, when you try to think about one issue, then you correct yourself when you come to another issue, and so on and so forth. We'll go back and forth with this example. So this is, for example, what it looked like in 2016. First part, so these are the 2 questions. So what percentage of the population of your state, in this case Pennsylvania, do you predict will vote for each of the candidates? And then this is what people do. So they play with this slider, right? So you can go, for example, when we did this experimentally, we did it first on students back home, asking them to predict their test scores, and then later we did it on elections. We noticed that people, when they come to these 2 questions about what other people think, they tend to kind of adjust their expectations a little bit, right? So for example, in this case, if, for example, you would go, Hillary is going to get like 60%, then Trump falls down to 20 something, and that's not realistic. So you're trying to kind of push yourself to be more realistic in giving these predictions what other people think. And the point here is that people tend to be much more objective when they think about others versus what they think about themselves. So if I ask you, do you vote for Trump or Biden or whoever, you're less likely to be truthful about this response than when I ask you, what do you think other people around you in your county, in your state, in wherever you live, what do they think? So that's the whole point. And we get people through Facebook and Twitter. We ask these questions, and then it comes the real interesting part, and that's this whole bubble analysis, right? Or the analysis of networks. So when we try to pick people, we call them, we want to find out the best observers. So people who are best at figuring out and understanding what the group around them tends to think, right? So basically, in this particular case, I wanted to show you how this looks like. So this is an example of a network that we did for the first election that we did back in 2015 in Croatia. This was just to test the whole methodology. And what you can see here is that every circle here is a voter. So individual respondent, right? We have about 6,000 people here. The size of the circle is how important you are for your network. So usually when people come into our survey, they solve it by social networks, and then they can share it, right? And when they share it, you attract other people to come in. So for example, this person, this big little bubble in here, attracted about 200 other people to come to the survey. So that's why he's more influential than, for example, some of these smaller circles. The colors of the circles are parties, and people are linked. If you can see these small little links between them, these are friendship links. So you're linked to someone whether or not, based on whether or not you're friends, in this case on Facebook. And what we can see, for example, the interesting part is this group. This is a typical bubble, right? So these are people who only only associate or friends on Facebook only with like-minded people, right? So when they, for example, and this is a particularly populist political party in Croatia. So when they give me a prediction about what their party is going to get, they say 50, 60%, which is unrealistic because their party is around, in that election, it was around 3 to 4%. Okay, so I know when they give me, so I know when they give me a prediction, they're much less likely to be precise, so I give them a much lower weight. Okay, this is a similar group. This is another bubble. This is another bubble as well. What I want to figure out is these people. Okay, people in the upper part of the network who are diverse, heterogeneous groups. Okay, so I want people who are have friends who are left wing, right wing, centrist, whatever, because these people, even though they might not accurately predict who the winner of the election might be, but they have a much higher chance. They have a higher probability of being right. So each person basically gets assigned a probability distribution function, and based on this is their weight. Okay, so we give each person a weight based on how likely they are to be more or less precise in predicting their environment. Okay? Whether this is an issue, a certain issue that we have in general, or a product, or in this case, a political candidate. But that's the whole point, right? Okay, so basically, yeah, as I said, each circle represents this one observer. Let me just see if I can. No, it doesn't matter. So we're looking for this clustering, and the point here is that because of the network, and because the network is kind of using a sort of a balanced sample, you no longer have to look for a perfectly representative sample of the population in order to get the accurate prediction. And that's the whole the bottom line of this approach, right? So we're trying to find people who are good at understanding their environments and then looking at their predictions and giving them a high weight. When we aggregate it, we take everyone into account, but basically we kind of focus more, we give a higher weight to people that are more likely to be precise. An interesting fact, so for example, if you can see these people around the network, these are people who don't have a lot of friends. A lot of them are actually bots, right? So fake accounts. We can also spot them very, very easily. Anyway, so taking this into account and comparing them to the regular polls, the polls have a particular problem that we've noticed throughout the past decade, basically. First of all, there's this problem of perception. Polls are not predictions, as I said here. They're snapshots of voter attitudes over time. So one poll is not a prediction. It's just where the voters are at this moment. When you look at polls, you should always basically look at trends, not just the final poll. However, a different problem that pollsters are facing is that their response rates are extremely low. Okay, so response rates before in the 90s or in the 80s or whatever were about 30 to 40%. Today they're down to 6%. I saw the latest Pew Research report, and it's about 6%, which means that in order to get a sample of, let's say, 600 people, you need to call 10,000 people. Right? And when you call 10,000 people, there's a high likelihood that a lot of the people you called will actually go out and vote or do something, but you're not getting them in the survey, right? So we're not talking about a shy voter, all right? So I've put here no evidence of a shy voter. There has been research trying to uncover the shy voter problem, but that's not the actual problem. The real problem is because you don't have the ability to get a representative sample as you did back in the past, what you now have to do is you have to adjust your models for that, right? So in 2020, pollsters, for example, adjusted their models to, I'm just gonna hide this. So the pollsters have adjusted their models to account for these low-educated voters, but they had an even bigger error basically in 2016, and the reason is the sampling bias with the models. There was an interesting, I wanted to show you this table. There was a very interesting text report from the New York Times. This was in 2016, when they basically took one data set, the same data set, so they did their own poll, and they had 1,000 people in them and did it for Florida. And they gave this same data set to 5 different pollsters. And with 5 different pollsters, each of them gave them 5 different results, from a Trump +1 to a Clinton +4, based on the same data set on the same users. The point was, why did different pollsters have different results? Because they're adjusting their models differently. They're sampling their models differently. So, for example, some people are placing a higher emphasis on low-educated minority voters, whatever, right? But the point is here that these models are wrong, right? So pollsters are having trouble with, number one, getting representative samples, and number two, getting right models to adjust for the problem of not having a good enough of a representative sample. Which is why our approach is the one that I've talked about before, is that we try to move beyond this problem. We try to move beyond the sampling and the non-response bias problem by building a network of users and figuring out this way, for the wisdom of crowds and network approach, what is going to be the best possible prediction. That's the whole point. So just to show you the results now of the previous 2 big elections that we did in 2016, we outperformed basically all polls, and at that point projecting that Trump is going to win the Electoral College, even though the Clinton was going to have more popular votes, which is exactly what happened. We gave Pennsylvania to Trump, where basically no one was giving it to Trump at that time, Florida, North Carolina as well, and it was very, very precise. At this point, our misses were Michigan and Wisconsin, simply because we didn't do any polling there. Well, we did some in Michigan, but not enough. And for others, we simply took the polling everywhere. We didn't have a lot of money back then. It was just an experimental approach. So we focused on, I think these are the only states that we focused on, these 8 states, which were projected to be, or I think a few others more, which were projected to be the most important ones. But it was a very, very accurate prediction. And in most states, this was, as you can see, the margins, the predictions for both of them was within a single percentage point margin. Same things happened a few months before that for Brexit, the Basel method, so the same one that was used here for the Trump prediction gave Leave 51.3%, while the actual outcome was 51.9. It was incredibly accurate. And for both of these cases, interestingly, so for us, Remain and Hillary were leading up until about 2 weeks before the election, when things started turning. Trump switched about 4 days before the election. Our prediction models were saying that Pennsylvania is going to Trump and that Florida is going to Trump, which kind of gave me, in Ohio as well, which kind of gave me a signal that this is it, right? This is happening. We tried. I didn't believe it because I was also, so for example, I'm a typical bubble person, right? I only surround myself with like-minded people. So I was at Oxford at the time doing a PhD, and I didn't believe at all that this was going to happen. I was thinking our model is wrong, something must be wrong. But I was saying, let's get more people in Pennsylvania, let's get more people in Florida. But as we got more people in, Trump's advantage was getting stronger and stronger. And this was kind of a signal, okay, that's it, let's call it for Trump in the end. So this is just a comparison to see our polling approach. So this is a calibration of the model, and calibration shows how close you are to the 45-degree line. So if you can imagine a 45-degree line going through here, you can see that we are basically very close to the 45-degree line, with only with our error being less than 1 percentage point, whereas the polling average had an error of underestimating Trump. So the average error was about 3%, but they were underestimating Trump by about 4 points on average, right? Somewhere it was more, somewhere it was less. But this is what we saw later when we were comparing them. I don't have the final graphs, but we were comparing basically the Hillary predictions were quite good. Okay, so they were accurate. There was not a big error there, but the Trump predictions were way off, right? So the pollsters back then had a problem of underestimating Trump, which is why there was that whole theory of a shy Trump voter existing, and that basically this was the reason why things didn't go through. However, as I said, already mentioned, academic research was done on that, and they found no evidence of a shy voter phenomenon, but it was rather they were saying the same thing that I was saying, that it was a sampling bias problem, and there was a non-response bias problem in this case. This is just some of the experts from the media last time. We did some campaigns and elections, New Scientist, whatever. I did a little piece for Oxford back then, featured. Now we're trying to get some media attention as well for this prediction, and I'll show you this prediction. All right. So in 2020, again, we ran our predictions. This time we did it for paying clients, people mostly in the finance industry, who wanted to find out before everyone else what was going to happen, and so that they can adjust their own expectations about the elections. And we also, but because of this, I opened it up to a lot of retail customers, and we got quite a few of them as well, buying the predictions for $50 or $100. And when I asked a lot of these people, why did you buy the prediction? Their answer was because we wanted to bet on the outcome of the election, which was very interesting. So people were earning money off of this, right? Betting on the outcome. Which is nice, I guess. Anyway, so what we did here, in the end, we're probably going to be very close to the electoral college distribution. It's going to be either 290, 295, or 306, depending on these 3 states, so Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. We're probably going to have misses in these 3 states, but all the others, the other 47, are going to be really quite well. So we basically, ever since we started doing this, end of September, and in no point that we saw any chance of a blue wave happening for the Democrats, or a big election night victory. And we were adamant in our report, stressing that this is not going to happen. The outcome is going to be post-electoral uncertainty. It's going to last for a few days. We even have a situation where, so we were saying, Florida is going for Trump, Ohio, Texas, Iowa, all these states are going for Trump. And we were saying that the races in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania are going to be much closer than what the polls are estimating. So what we basically said at that point to our clients is, just wait for it. Biden's going to win in the end, but it's not going to happen on election night, definitely, right? And when this was happening on election night, I started getting emails early in the morning on Wednesday saying, "Oh my God, is Trump going to win this? Is this happening again?" And then I sent a big email to all of our clients saying, "No, this is not happening. Just, as we said, be patient." Trump did win Florida, exactly as we said. Trump won Ohio, as we said, in Texas, etc. And even though he was winning at the time, he was leading in votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I was saying there's still 3 million votes to be counted in Pennsylvania, 3 million votes to be counted in Michigan. All of these are mail-in votes where Biden has a 80-20 advantage. So I was saying, just be patient, and we're going to get by the end of the day, we're going to get Wisconsin and Michigan. By the end of the week, we're probably going to get Pennsylvania, maybe even next week. It happened on Saturday. And so this was the final outcome, as we all know. And now Biden is on course to getting approximately somewhere in between these 294 electoral college votes. Just a quick comparison of the predictions. Again, this is for marketing purposes. Obviously, very low error in predicting Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada compared to the final outcomes. Whereas the polling averages had about a 4 to 5% error, which is slightly higher than the usual error. Much higher error for them in Florida, Ohio, but also for us. So we had a higher error. So we gave Florida narrowly to Trump. The reason why we still gave it to Trump, even with this such a small margin, is because Florida, for us in the model, again, this time flipped 2 weeks before the election, and it kept staying Trump. So we kept pushing a lot of people in, thousands of new voters in, to try to see if Florida is going to flip, and it didn't. It stayed consistently. But what was the reason for my confidence in the Biden win is that the same thing was happening in these 3 states. Okay, so in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, we were polling up until the very last day of the campaign, and it never changed. It never switched to Trump, even though it was always very close. It was always very close. Biden was at each point having a less than a 1% advantage over Trump, but at no point did we see none of these 3 states flipping. We saw Florida flipping, and this kind of gave us a strong signal that Trump is going to definitely win there. But none of these states, none of the blue wall states up north, ever made a switch, right? So again, as I said, a little bit less precise in Ohio and Florida, but again, much better than the polling average. This is the polling average taken out from RCP and Nate Silver's polling aggregates. Not his prediction, but the polling aggregates of everyone else. Okay. So again, model calibration, again, incredible precision. This time, as you can see, the average underestimation of Trump was about 6%. Which is very strange. This time for Biden, it was a bit less precise than for Hillary, just a bit, but still very, very close. I'm talking about the polling average, but overall about a 6% error. For us, again, close to 1% error. Very strong calibration of the model. Somewhere a bit off, but on average, very, very good calibration of the model itself. This is the thing I also wanted to show, right? Looking only at the 12 most important states where we were polling. So this time we polled much more states than last time, but we were focusing the majority of our attention to 12 important swing states, and this is just a comparison between our calibration and the polls calibration. So the difference between the 45-degree line, between the differences between Trump and Biden. And this is the underestimation of Trump. So you can see basically the underestimation of Trump with other pollsters was again huge. What we saw before the election, and this is something that I wrote in the report, we're again seeing an underestimation of Trump. We thought it was going to be less than before, but it was actually more than before. So the underestimation of Trump with the polls was actually bigger than before. However, still, it didn't affect our final prediction in terms of Biden, because we were seeing a clear Biden trend in the 3 important states up north, so Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Just a few other interesting results from the election, and then I'm gonna, from the surveys, and then I'm gonna quit. Finish the presentation. So we did anticipate a contested election. Contested in the sense the question was, do you expect the outcome to be known on election night? That was the actual question, right? And people, not this one that was posted here. And yeah, 60% of our users actually, 64% expected some kind of a contested outcome. It was very even between Republicans and Democrats, which is interesting. And in terms of representative sample, to come back to our previous discussion on polling, so the sample was skewed towards Biden a little bit. I mean, even not just a little bit, it was significantly skewed. So if we just look at our survey, so when the first question of the survey is who are you going to vote for, 50%, 52% we're going to vote for Biden, and 40% are going to vote for Trump. So based on this, you can conclude, it's a 12% advantage for Biden, but that's not actually the case, right? This is not our prediction. So this is like a standard online survey. Obviously, it's favoring the Democrat, but what we were saying that that's why we have the whole network approach, right? Because we can eliminate this bias. Because a lot of Biden voters in some places were saying, for example, in Florida, were saying that Trump might take this, right? Or in Ohio or in Texas, right? But in Pennsylvania also, some Trump voters were saying, we're going to narrowly lose, for example. So this is what we're trying to find out, like the best users among these groups to try to get the most accurate prediction. In terms of age, gender, and party affiliation, it's all in the expected direction in terms of users. Excuse me. We had slightly more male than female voters in this case, and the age distribution is relatively fine. A little bit less on the younger voters, but quite a few older voters in. Expected direction, so younger voters going more for Biden and for others. Interesting, we had about 8% of people voting for the third-party candidates, so a little bit skewed towards that direction. But then among the older age groups, more of them going for Trump than for Biden. And this is an interesting finding. So we saw that, so only for people in the swing states, we saw that Trump, this was a question, who did you vote for back in 2016, the Democrat or Republican? And people that voted Republican back in 2016, about 11% of them were going away for Trump in this election. For Democrats, only 2% were going away for Trump. So basically, Biden had a 9% advantage here. But then when you account for an increase in turnout, you can see that basically this effect was switching towards Biden, even though Trump had a very, very strong showing, getting over, I think, 71 million voters, which is a extremely well result for him, despite the fact that he lost, and he did lose. So I'm not buying any of those conspiracy theory arguments. Just a comparison, finally, for other predictors. So this time we were always tracking our, well, we're not going to say competition because we're in different games here. But yeah, with the polling aggregators, so 538, RPC, Princeton, Polyvote, Upshot, The Economist, they were all giving us very strong, except Polyvote, probability for Biden. For us, it was about 80%. It was kind of varying between 80 and 85%. In terms of the Electoral College, the average here, as you can see, was about 340 Electoral College votes for Biden. A strong vote share advantage as well. In terms of prediction markets, and this is interesting, prediction markets and betting odds were much more bearish on Biden this time, as opposed to Hillary. So, for example, when we compare this to 4 years ago for Hillary, she was going, about 80, close to 80, 85% with the prediction markets. Same thing for betting odds, over 80%. This time they were much more careful, simply because a lot of people were buying. Betting on Trump, right? And this was especially noticeable on election day, when the odds started shifting in Trump's favor, and especially the day after the election, where Trump at one point, according to the betting markets, had a higher percentage of winning, which is something that, again, this is why I had to remind my clients that this is not going to happen. And despite the fact that the odds are jumping in Trump's favor, and I was even encouraging a few friends I know, feel free to bet on to keep betting on Biden, because this is happening. Okay, and I'm going to end here. This is just our contact information. Thank you again for listening, for paying attention. Okay. I don't know. All right, I'm going to stop.
Thank you very much, Vuk, and thank you for making it more simple than I'm pretty sure it actually is. The audience that is following this chat, we dedicate our, we are professionals in the industry. And I think, like, even for us, it's very difficult to sometimes follow the inner workings. And I think with your presentation, you did it brilliantly. So congratulations on that. Before I give the floor to some others, I I want to make sure that I'm getting that I am understanding everything. So, in fact, not every single poll got it wrong. So some polls did get it right. The thing is that the public at large was not consuming all those polls, but I am pretty sure that in the campaign headquarters, they were using advanced methods like yours, like the wisdom of crowds. Is that actually the case? So there are two different walls: the polls consumed by company HQ, the polls consumed by the public at large, and if that's the case, shouldn't we stop paying attention to these big polls that are commissioned by the media, probably with already an answer in mind, because you are paying not for the truth, you are paying for something that gives you a few more clicks?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's a great question. I think I got some feedback from people who were doing campaigns in the US, and a lot of them were saying that the internal polls were well, maybe a little bit better, but still it gave them signals to spend money in the wrong direction. So, for example, a lot of money was spent in races in, let's say, Ohio, which ended up going 8% for Trump. And they were cutting spending in, for example, Michigan and Wisconsin, thinking this is up 9 or 8 or 9%. We shouldn't be spending so much money there. Let's go for Ohio. If we're close to Ohio, let's switch that and turn it blue. But again, I think this is just I mean, I heard two stories of this, so it could be anecdotal, right? So we're not sure if this is actually the case, that most internal polls were also wrong. But I think there is some resentment. This is what I felt, some resentment towards the polls from the within the campaigns. But we have to see if this is actually true, and we will see this based on how many people start calling us from the campaigns industry. But in terms of your question of whether or not polls are kind of shifting or kind of moving public opinion, I mean, this is absolutely true, right? This is what they usually do, and the media has this sort of maybe it's not even a bias that they're aware of. Maybe it's something that they're not aware of. But simply, just trying to push information out there to get more clicks, which is true. I mean, it is a business model in the end. But eventually, I don't think it's not something that's going to stop anytime soon, because people want this information, right? So people are consumers of information, and if they want to read articles about polls, they will, and these articles are typically the ones that are most read for every media outlet. So this is not going to stop anytime soon, at least in my opinion.
Okay. Dinesh from Hungary.
Yes, Punoti Fala. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Fascinating. I would be interested, have you conducted a prediction with regards to the 2019 European parliamentary elections? And the reason why I'm asking is, it must be very difficult to predict an election where in every EU member state, all 27, the voting age is different legislation is in place, the constituency forms are different. So if not, do you plan on doing so in 2024? And since I work on a European Citizens Initiative called Minority Safe Pack, I have to say that I think it's very difficult to predict such an election precisely for this diversity. And I'm curious whether you think the EU system is much more difficult to do so than the US system. Kala.
Yeah, more. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think this methodology in particular is typically the most precise when you have a binary outcome, right? So when it's either or, right? So I showed you 3 examples. I showed you Trump in 2016, Brexit, and Biden. We did it also for Macron, for example, in France, Macron versus Le Pen, but only for the second round. And typically when we do parties, we only did it in Croatia. It's not as good as the binary outcome, right? So there are certain problems, and this is simply because there's a lot of parties, and then it kind of dispersed. The whole thing gets dispersed, right? So we would need to have a much bigger sample, which would cost much more money, right? So I'm thinking, so typically, if we want to do party politics in Europe, so I would have to go down to a constituency level and to get enough people at every single constituency in order to get this in order to get an accurate prediction. So for example, for Britain, right? For British elections, the EU referendum was perfect because it was a binary option, and then whatever happens in every region, it's the same thing, same response. But if we have to go down and do polling for a specific party, we actually had some talks with a few parties in the UK, but we gave them such a high price that they couldn't basically pay for it, simply because I had to go down to every single constituency and figure out what's going to happen in that particular constituency in order to get the outcome. So it is possible to answer your question, but it's much more expensive.
So perhaps that's why we need a European campaign playbook on this topic. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? Please raise the hand. Okay, Mercedes, go ahead.
Sorry, hi.
Hi.
Well, thank you so much, because to me, this topic is extremely necessary, especially right now. I have to accept I am very ignorant on the topic. I can't count and I don't know. It's very intriguing to me what you guys do. And I think I agree with you that polls will be needed, because you can't run a campaign without polling. Even if it's not 100% accurate, you just can't do it. So I agree, but I have a few questions. So the first one is, I'm sure you explained it, but I didn't really understand the answer. And it's, why do you believe polls, once again, especially under the stress that they were in given last election, how did they keep getting it wrong, especially the week before the election, with some some states going +7 for Biden when that wasn't the case? The second one is, what metrics do you use when you see, you talked about people who had a bigger influence on other people? I don't know if I'm correct. So sometimes you get a few people that you're polling and you get a higher percentage rate of their influence or their decision in the vote. So what metrics do you use, or how do you say these people we're gonna rate them higher?
Okay. Let me answer the second question first, and I'll come back to the first one. Sorry. So this this approach is this is something that we started writing back in 2014 as a scientific paper, right? We wanted to find this way of trying to figure out a better way of extracting the right information in terms of decision-making information from people. When we were starting testing it on students in Croatia, and we started testing on elections, we figured out that the paper is not worth it. We're going to start a business instead, and that was kind of so to answer your question. I can't tell you the exact thing that we do, but I'll paint you a picture, right? So I see how you predict your community is gonna vote, right? And what your community thinks. And I see their answers as well. So I need you to share, for example, your friends coming in, etc. So I can see how you are predicting your friends and how your friends are predicting you. And I can see which one of you is more precise, right? And based on this, so this gives you a slightly higher or slightly lower weight in your prediction for the final outcome. So that's the whole point, right? So I want to see, first of all, I want to figure out how you understand your community, your environment. So if it's a bubble, fine, it's a bubble, right? So you exist in a bubble, and that's okay. If it's heterogeneous, even better. So you have a higher likelihood of understanding the whole environment. And this gives us a sort of an idea, a proxy, basically, of whether or not you're going to be an accurate forecaster or not. That's the whole idea. So for example, myself, I'm not an accurate forecaster. I get it wrong all the time, right? Because I live in a bubble, right? All my friends are, thinking the same way as I do. So I don't have a kind of a good view of what, the group that I don't like, what they think, right? So for example, I was certain that Hillary is going to win last time. I didn't believe in our own methodology, right? This time I was afraid that Trump might win, but didn't happen, luckily, right? So again, but so my hunches are wrong. I've learned to know that whatever my hunch is, the opposite is going to happen. So that's good, at least something. But yeah, so the point is we try to figure out who is a sort of who has a better understanding of the environment. So that's why we call them observers, right? So we want to try to find the best observers. Going back, so what was the first question again? I'm sorry, I slipped my mind. It was
no, it was kind of complicated. So I was just asking, what do you think went wrong this time again? They started polling.
Okay, sure.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Right, so this time, what went wrong is, so I read a lot of reports about what pollsters are doing, and some of them were saying basically that this time they're adjusting their models based on education. So last time they had a lot of low education vote, they had a lack of low education voters, so this time they were adjusting their models to account more for these people. But the problem is that you're not getting these people, right? You're still not getting in the polls. So it all comes back essentially to the non-response bias thing. So think of it this way, right? So if the response rate before, like in the 90s, if you wanted to get 600 people to join a survey, you needed to call 1,500 of them, right? And of those 1,500, let's say half of them are not going to vote anyway, so that's fine, right? Half of the people don't vote. So you're going to get, from those who do vote, a pretty good representative sample of those who actually will vote. Today, if you want a sample of 600, as I said, you need to call 10,000 people. And of those 10,000, again, 5,000 are not going to vote, fine. But of those other 5,000, you're going to have about 4,000 people who are going to vote, but you're not getting to, right? You're not hearing their point of view. You're not hearing what they have to say. And that's the problem. And I mean, pollsters are aware of this problem. They have been aware of this problem for the past 20 years, since the response rates started to decline. One of the reasons is because people, first of all, don't have telephones anymore in their homes, right? So you don't have a fixed line, a landline phone. And on cell phones, it's a bit more tricky to get people to it's psychological. People perceive this as a bigger intrusion of privacy than when you're being called on a landline phone. And whereas on the other hand, online surveys have this problem of being biased towards the younger, more educated urban populations, which is, obviously always leaning a little bit more to the left. So you have this problem of trying to, wherever you go, you're going to get a biased sample. You're not going to get the full sample, which is why our approach is forget all that and let's move beyond that in terms of asking people who you think is going to win and what your community thinks. And this is where we find people to be much more objective. Right? So even when we get people in the survey who are, let's say, Trump voters, if they don't necessarily say that, for example, yeah, I'm voting Trump, so they say I'm undecided, for example. But then I see the friends, and they're all voting Trump, so I can have a pretty good understanding of who this person is actually voting for, right? So I have a pretty good way of understanding what their community feels like and what they feel like. That's the whole point of the approach, and that's the difference.
Okay, I think we have time for a few more questions. Anyone?
I think we have Sam, right?
Yeah. Thanks very much for this so far. I mean, I really am interested in all the polling. I was watching a lot of polling videos on YouTube and stuff for the last few months, even up until the election. So again, it was less of a surprise to me, the result, because I was watching the different granularity of the polls in the States and everything else. So I had a similar prediction to what you had, actually.
Cool.
So because again, it was about trying to see the different steps. So I found what your analysis is really interesting.
Thank you.
My question is then, what do you think is the next step in this kind of analysis? Like, how will it advance? What are there like new methods to bring in? How will you refine things in the future? What's the developments that are coming up for this?
So typically, every time we run a survey, we try some different questions, right? So we don't usually do a lot of election surveys. Elections for us are just a way of testing new things, right? This time we didn't test anything. We just wanted to be sure that, because it was for paying clients, so we didn't want to play around. But when we're doing other elections, we're trying to test different things. So for example, one of the questions that we were testing is, instead of just asking what everyone in your country or your state or your neighborhood think, we asked about, like, give us the predictions of your top 10 best friends, for example, right? And then we saw does this make people more or less precise. It didn't actually improve the model that much, but we're going to try, we're always going to try different things to see what works and what doesn't. Right? But yeah, so it's always evolving. Typically, when we do commercial projects, we have a room for experimentation as well. So this is, typically for figuring out. We do a lot of survey experiments, for example, so figuring out which message works and which message doesn't work for a certain, consumer group, whether they want to buy a product or not, or which communication channel tends to work, which segmenting people into profiles, that sort of thing. And this is all well and fine, but for elections, we can kind of go crazy and then test a lot of different things and see how they work. But thus far, the whole thing, the initial version of the model works really, really well. And whenever we try to mess with it a little bit, it doesn't give as accurate as a result as the original, right? So we're kind of sticking to it for as long as it's, don't fix it if it's not broken, basically.
Okay, I got another question.
Sure.
We some of us we're decision makers in our organizations, and we need to decide whether we spend X amount of money on a poster. If so, in what different types of posters, etc. There are a lot of options out there. There are a few ones who are very innovative and that are being pitched as being very innovative. One of them is polls of polls. What do you think? Even Politico has that nowadays. What's your opinion on that one?
So a poll of polls is something like what the Real Clear Politics does, right? So it's just an average of all the polls, right? Yeah, I mean, it's useful. So first of all, I wanted to just stress, even going back to the question that Mercedes had, yeah, I mean, what we need polls, right? So we can't, if we had no polls, then people would not have any prior information based on what they're giving us. So for us, polls are a necessary tool, a necessary anchor, for example, right? That people do have. So if you're going into a survey, you're solving our survey, and you're thinking in your head about what the polls are saying, and you're adjusting based on this information. So it's a prior, right? That's why our approach is a little bit Bayesian, because we're trying to force you to move from a prior, giving some specific extra, different type of question, and going to a different posterior probability. So that's kind of the idea. That's why we call it the Bayesian survey. So yeah, all these polls of polls and all this stuff is actually useful, right? Which is why we also track the polling aggregators. So for example, Nate Silver has a more elaborate model than just a simple average that the RCP does, or you mentioned Political or whatever. But it is useful to look at this data, definitely, right? It tells you something, and at least it gives you a sort of a trend line prediction of where things are going, right? So at this point, if we're looking at the 2020 election, at no point did the polls ever say that Trump was going to win, and eventually Trump did not win, right? So which is, when we can say, yeah, this is what actually happened. The polls were saying that Trump is never going to win, but it's just they didn't predict it with such a strong accuracy. They were saying that it's going to be a blue wave, whatever. But if you look at the Real Clear Politics polling average, it was kind of moving. The trend was kind of moving over the last week into Trump's direction. So the angle was narrowing a little bit. I know I showed you in the last slide that Real Clear Politics was actually down to 319 electoral college votes for Trump, as opposed to others who were giving him 350. And 2 weeks before that, RCP was giving Trump about 350, Biden 350. So they were kind of narrowing it down as well. Again, they didn't capture the full extent. This is what happened last time. We also saw with the aggregators that some of these polls were narrowing down more in favor of Trump, but they didn't capture it fully up until the election day. And the story was simply because there was too many undecided voters, and this is what eventually made the switch towards Trump, which is, I guess, a good enough of an explanation.
Thank you very much. I think that answers my question, because where I'm coming from is that, and some people out there in the industry agree, is that there is a fundamental problem in the methodology and in the raw data that poll firms use, because you have a problem when one of the theories that I read was that there were two type of groups that really made the election a little bit more closer: the Latino community all across the country, and the suburban, white suburban voters. The first ones went with Trump more than expected. The second ones to Biden, and they said we cannot have enough data of those groups for various different reasons to be able to make a prediction. So there is something fundamentally wrong in the methodology. in the raw data. And that's why when wisdom of crowds and what you guys are doing, to me that's innovative enough. That's and you being able to predict through sure, binary elections, but important elections nevertheless. And there are a lot of companies who need this information for various reasons. Some of them might lose or win money. We in the campaign industry, we really want to see what's the best technology out there to be able to bring it to our campaigns. So do you think, do you agree that there is something fundamentally wrong in the raw data and the methodology, and that's why you launched this company?
Oh, absolutely, right. So just to touch upon the examples that you mentioned. You were saying, so they missed the Latino votes and they missed the suburban votes because you couldn't get enough of them. Exactly, that's the whole problem, and it's a fundamental problem that you need to get all these people to make a representative sample. For us, you don't need to do that. The sample doesn't need to be perfectly representative. It needs to be balanced, but it doesn't need to be perfect. So, for example, I'll give you a perfect example. When we did Brexit. When we did Brexit, we didn't have a company back then, so I was sending a survey out to my friends, and most of them live in London, and most of them, almost all of them, vote for Remain, right? But they were saying, I'm up in from Yorkshire, and my entire family up there is voting for Leave, right? Even though I'm voting for Remain, right? So and that's the point of the wisdom of crowds element. When you ask about what other people that you know, what they're going to do. So these people that were answering the surveys were saying, yeah, I'm voting for Remain, but everyone in my family, my uncles, my grandparents, they're all voting for Leave. And which is so his prediction is Leave, not Remain. Right? So for me, that's the prediction of Leave for that area, for that region. Same thing. We had a similar case for a commercial client, for example. They wanted to get a lot more older users, and they wanted to figure out what's the optimal communication channel to reach older users. Now, we don't get a lot of older users in the survey, and the reason is because they're not really, you have a lot of them on social media, Facebook especially, so Facebook is becoming much more skewed towards the older populations. Now, the younger people are moving away from Facebook to Snapchat and TikTok and whatever. Instagram, but they don't like filling out surveys because they think it's a data breach, whatever, privacy breach. But we do get some of them in, and when we ask them, what are other older people, so people like you, what are they going to do? What do they react upon? And they tell us. And so we delivered this information to our clients, saying that if you want to get to older people, you don't do TV ads, you don't do radio ads, whatever, billboards. The best way to get to them is direct mail. So you send them a mail, when they sit down, they open it up, they read it, and that's how you get them engaged, for example, right? So by asking just a few people from that community, so it doesn't need to be only one, it needs to be a bit more, you get a good and accurate overview of what the rest of the community thinks, even if you don't get a representative sample of that particular community. And that's something that we see happening in our surveys. Again, you still have to have people in there, right? It's just you don't have to have it perfectly representative.
Good. Anyone else?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Eduardo.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for your presentation. I found it really amusing, and I found a lot of things that reminded me a lot of Noel Neumann's the theory of the spiral of silence, especially the first questions. I was wondering if you see polls being replaced by, let's say, big data or data analytics, data mining in the future, in order to somehow work around the sample bias and to get a bigger picture because of all the digital tracks everyone lives online. Maybe that helps you get a better understanding of how someone is going to react or vote or decide. I want to know your opinion there.
Well, that's a great question, and yeah, I think definitely a lot of it is going to go into that direction for sure. I have a friend who's doing the same type of sentiment analysis using Twitter and Reddit. So they're looking at what people say on Twitter and on Reddit, because these are two platforms where you can easily scrape information about what people are saying. And based on this sentiment, they're basically estimating of where the direction of which the vote is going to be. And I was talking to him just a few days before the election. So he asked me about our results. I asked him about his. And he was saying, yeah, on Twitter, we can see the sentiment moving away from Trump. Right? So even though like you can see Trump being dominant, the dominant trending hashtag all the time, you know, in the past 4 years, basically, he was the dominant trending hashtag. But a lot of that in the last few weeks before the election was actually moving away from him in terms of the sentiment, right? So what people were saying about him, or how this was moving pro and against him. Because some people are doing these comparisons by looking at, so Trump has 80 million followers and Biden has, what, 5 million or something, 15 million, I don't know. But it's not really an accurate portrayal, right? First of all, because Trump has people that are following him who don't like him, and he has a lot of people outside of the country that are following him. So what you need to focus on is really what people are writing. So a lot of new organizations or efforts are being made to use natural language processing, where you can basically analyze text, scrape all this text and analyze it and see what people are saying and what they're thinking. And I think this will definitely be one direction, a future direction of where the whole polling or market research industry is going to end up eventually, because people are being fed up with solving surveys. And this time we tried two approaches. We did our own standard Facebook polling, and we also did panels. So we hired one panel just to see how it works. There was not much of a difference, which is good, which is interesting. But then again, we saw that a lot of people in the panel, about 30% of them just went through the survey in like 10 seconds, which is not really useful, because they were just clicking through because they're getting paid a few cents a survey. They just clicked through. But other people were, the majority was actually quite good. And we can always correct for these sort of things. But yeah, so to answer your question, definitely, I think it's going to, the industry will, not just polling, but market research in general is going to move into that direction of trying to just scrape information that's available, that's out there, that's publicly available, and try to see what the people are thinking in terms of like their sentiment.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, and I think on that note, I think we touch upon many things. Firstly, to answer the question that brought us here and that people raised during the election night, I think we now have a much better view. So thanks for that. But we also went further and see what's the state in Europe, what are the challenges, what are the next steps, and I found it very interesting. The last thing that I wanted to ask you is, I Googled wisdom of crowds. A lot of books come across, a lot of interesting stuff. But if we want to know more about it, what would be your recommendation for a book?
Okay.
And then
I'll pick one up. Yeah. Okay. This one. Surowiecki, Wisdom of Crowds. It's very good, actually. Very interesting. Yeah, he's a reporter from, I think, Washington Post or somewhere. I don't know. I'm not really sure. But it's a very interesting book.
And the name, James?
He's Polish, so Surowiecki. If you see it, James Surowiecki.
Very good book.
Yeah, you read it, right? Yeah. I mean, it's
Polish,
interesting because
I must. I'm Hungarian.
Yeah, of course. Fair enough. No, it's interesting because he explains all the things that you need to kind of keep in mind in order to figure this out. But there's also, so this is a popular version. It's a popular book, right? There's a few scientific papers written by Andreas Moore, M-U-R-R. You can Google him. He was at Oxford before. Now he's in Warwick in the UK, and he has quite a few good papers on using wisdom of crowds to predict UK elections. So he was using the official data from the polls there, and he did a really good job. And I recommend those papers. Andreas Moore. He has about 5 or 6 papers on the topic of wisdom of crowds. But just a point here: wisdom of crowds alone is not enough, basically, in this particular context. So when we tried, when we run our people through our methodology, we can try different ways of calculating the final result. For 2016, pure wisdom of crowds would not be enough to get Trump or Brexit. Today, for Biden, it would be. For Biden, it would be enough, but for Brexit and Trump, it wouldn't. So the network analysis was really crucial in that perspective. In the Biden election, I think even just the pure wisdom of crowds would be enough. It would be less precise. So it would still give Biden much more than what we ended up giving him, but it would still be, predicting the right winner.
All right, and I love that the author is European.
Both of them. I think Moore is also European. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So I would say that we will leave it here. Thank you very much again, and I'm pretty sure we'll come across you in one of when the conferences come back. I'm pretty sure we'll see each other again. And thank you everyone for joining. It's been a pleasure.
I'm looking forward to that, actually. Yeah. I haven't traveled since March. I'm stranded in Zagreb. I haven't been to London since March, basically. And my company is in the UK, right? So but I'm stranded here.
Muchas gracias.
Right.
Voila. And hopefully one of your books are going to be recommended at one of our future chats once you manage to write up some of what
that'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you.
I promise once you get to it, I'll recommend it. Just please
but my book is not anything on like campaigns. My book is on like elite networks and how I'm looking at the collusion between politics and the corporate sector, which is very interesting as well. But yeah.
You got to write a story of the election and predictions for sure.
Well, I'll think about it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I'm closing the meeting now. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.